Half an hour ago, to save face, I sent my ex-boyfriend a picture of my boss, along with the message, "My husband." Well, fate has a peculiar sense of humor. During a company meeting, my laptop was used to project presentations onto the big screen. And wouldn't you know it, I accidentally clicked open my chat history with my ex. The entire conference room went silent. I wanted the earth to swallow me whole. I was so mortified. I was ready to hand in my resignation. My boss, a man known for his enigmatic smile, looked at me and said, "Darling, are you planning on becoming a full-time housewife?" If only I could turn back time, I would never have sent my ex that picture. Who is my boss, you might ask? He's Mr. Lucian Thorne, a graduate of a prestigious university, and the president of an internet company. Such a titan was far beyond my reach, yet here I was, having publicly married him in front of the company's top executives. As soon as the meeting ended, I bolted out of the conference room and locked myself in the restroom. I stared at the toilet, suddenly wanting to bury my head inside like an ostrich. 10 minutes later, I emerged from the bathroom. My colleagues looked at me with a mixture of awe and pity. Clearly, my glorious mishap had become company lore. I mustered my courage, brewed a cup of coffee, and went into the boss's office. "Mr. Thorne, your coffee," I said, trying to sound nonchalant, while stealing glances at Lucian. He was undeniably handsome. A well-tailored suit emphasized his broad shoulders and slim waist. He possessed sharp features and an air of aristocratic aloofness. Suddenly he looked up, his gaze piercing. "Am I that good-looking?" he murmured, his voice low, magnetic, and laced with a hint of tenderness. I shook my head. I must be hallucinating. My boss was a workaholic and a notoriously blunt, straightforward man. There was that story about the actress who offered herself to him. My boss's response? He immediately reported her for sexual harassment. So I figured this line was just a warning, to stop me from developing feelings for him and affecting my work. I quickly reassured him, "Mr. Thorne, that message was just a joke. I swear, I have no ulterior motives towards you." As soon as I said that, his expression seemed to turn colder. That afternoon, the boss was in a foul mood during the meeting and gave several department managers a scathing dressing down. They turned pleading eyes towards me. Brewed a pot of tea and set it with some snacks in front of Mr. Thorne. "Mr. Thorne, you've been working hard all afternoon. You must be hungry. Have something to eat." Shortly after I was hired, Mr. Thorne had asked if I knew how to make traditional treats. It was quite a coincidence that I was born in Lingnan and learned to make such treats with my grandmother. That skill was what had secured my position as his assistant. Afraid he would be embarrassed eating alone, I brought another plate out. "Would you care to try some as well, managers?" Lucian turned to look at them, and the managers seemed to shrink back simultaneously. "No, we're fine, we're not hungry at all," they said quickly. Once Mr. Thorne had eaten, he seemed much more relaxed and let the managers off the hook. "Thank goodness for Miss," someone mumbled under their breath. In truth, I hadn't really done much, just satisfied the man's appetite. A few days later, as I entered the office, I overheard Mr. Thorne on the phone. "I don't want to get married yet. I'll decide my own affairs. You don't need to interfere." His tone was sharp. It seemed even the mighty Mr. Thorne had to deal with the same pressures to get married as the rest of us. Wanting to avoid getting caught in the crossfire, I began to retreat, but Mr. Thorne called out, "Miss Eleanor, come here." I walked over and he turned his computer screen towards me. It displayed a picture of a beautiful woman. Given the phone call, I guessed it was someone his family had introduced to him. The woman had delicate features and an outstanding air of elegance. I knew Mr. Thorne didn't want to go on these blind dates, but I also didn't want to lie. So I gave an honest reply. "She's very pretty and a great match for you, Mr. Thorne." "Right then, I'll go meet her," he said with a bitter tone, as if he was just doing it out of spite. I was thoroughly confused. Towards the end of the day, I got a call from my ex-boyfriend, Reese. Hearing his voice, I immediately wanted to hang up. "Eleanor Lightwood, if you hang up on me, I'll call your mother." I groaned. He's still acting like a child, calling my mom. But what can I do? My mom really likes him. She would absolutely start hounding me. "All right, what is it?" "I'm taking you out for dinner." I've already made the reservation. After work, I went to the restaurant Reese had chosen. He wasn't there yet. He was always late by at least half an hour, if not an hour. I was used to it. As fate would have it, Mr. Thorne and his blind date were sitting right behind me. Lucian was facing away from me, sitting ramrod straight. Even from just his back, you could tell he was a handsome man. The woman opposite him wore a black dress and had a small face with delicate, elegant features, making her even more beautiful than in the picture. The two sat facing each other, looking like a match made in heaven. But their conversation was far from heavenly. If we get married, you'll have to quit your job and become a full-time housewife. I have a cleanliness fetish and don't like hiring housekeepers, so you'll be responsible for all the housework. I'm a picky eater, don't like eating out, so you'll have to cook for me. And if I don't like it, you'll have to redo it. I was dumbstruck. Was this for real? This wasn't looking for a wife. This was looking for a maid. The woman across from him was also speechless. I bet she didn't expect that the successful, handsome Lucian Thorne could be so shameless. She couldn't take it anymore and quickly excused herself. Lucian left shortly after. I turned to watch his retreating figure, thinking, no wonder he's so handsome yet single. It all made sense now. Just then I felt a tap on my head, followed by an enthusiastic voice. Eleanor. I turned around to see Reese. He was wearing athletic gear and had a bright smile on his face. It was his smile that had first attracted me to him. We had first met in the hospital. He was an adventure blogger who had broken his leg during a climbing accident. We happened to be in the same ward. I was in a bad mood then, and he told me all sorts of interesting stories that cheered me up. After we were discharged, we naturally got together. I found extreme sports cool, but it was another matter when my boyfriend liked them. I was constantly worried for his safety. If he didn't reply to my messages, for a while, I'd be afraid that something bad had happened to him. When other people were sick, they had their boyfriends to keep them company. When it rained, they had their boyfriends to pick them up. I often couldn't even get in contact with Reese. Eventually, I couldn't bear it any longer. I told Reese to choose between extreme sports or me. He chose extreme sports without a second thought. And just like that, Reese became my ex-boyfriend. A few days earlier, my long-lost ex-boyfriend had suddenly messaged me. Eleanor, I heard you're still single. You wouldn't be waiting for me, would you? To save face, I sent him a photo of my boss. My husband. This blasted ex-boyfriend was the source of all my awkwardness. Eleanor. Do you know where I was when I messaged you? I was whitewater rafting on the Zambezi River. It was so exhilarating, he rambled on. When I loved him, I thought everything he said was interesting. Now I just found him annoying. What did you call me here for? I asked impatiently. Eleanor. I've realized I can't forget you. How about we get back together? I'm sorry, but I already have a husband. I sent you the picture. I looked it up, that picture's of your company's CEO. There's no way your boss would be interested in you. You're lying, aren't you? I almost choked. What did he mean my boss couldn't possibly be interested in me? Could he be more insulting? Though he did have a point. Who said I wasn't interested in her? A low magnetic voice sounded from beside me. I turned my head to see my boss. Lucian lightly placed his arm around my shoulders, striking a very intimate pose. Darling, why are you meeting your ex-boyfriend behind my back? He asked, his voice full of tenderness and feigned grievance. That darling sent shivers down my spine. This was Oscar-worthy acting. If I didn't know better, I would have thought that he really was my husband. Darling, I was wrong. Next time I will let you know. Seeing that Mr. Thorne was willing to play along, I immediately went with it, just to show up my ex-boyfriend. And it worked. Reese's always smiling face vanished, replaced by a look of disbelief. He looked from Lucian to me, clearly not understanding what was going on. And that was how I came to owe my boss a favor. The next day he asked me to repay it. Accompany me to an evening gala. The gala arrived quickly. Lights sparkled everywhere and the attendees were all dressed to the nines. I had changed into an elegant gown and put on makeup. I had to make sure I didn't embarrass Mr. Thorne as his date. Mr. Thorne was still wearing his expensive suit and looked handsome and refined. As I linked my arm with Mr. Thorne entering the gala, Many eyes fell upon me. It wasn't my beauty that had drawn their attention, but rather the question, which woman had managed to hook up with the young and successful Lucian Thorne? I quickly learned why Mr. Thorne had brought me to the gala. To fend off unwanted attention. And one such unwanted attention was particularly aggressive. She stormed right up to Mr. Thorne, pointing at me and asking, "Lucian dear, who is she?" I knew this woman. She was Miss Imogen Fairfax, the daughter of a prominent family, who had once pursued Lucian relentlessly. Then, for some unknown reason, she had stopped coming to the company. It was clear she hadn't given up on her quest. Mr. Thorne pulled me closer to his side. "My girlfriend." Miss Fairfax's eyes widened. "I don't believe you. Unless you kiss her." I was stunned. What kind of demand was that? Mr. Thorne was a germaphobe. He would never agree to this. To my surprise, Mr. Thorne suddenly cupped my chin and tilted my head up. His handsome face drew closer, his warm breath washing over me. "May I?" he asked in a low voice. Who could resist this beauty right in front of me? I nodded immediately. A kiss landed, stealing my breath away. My heart pounded, my mind blank. I had even forgotten how I had left the venue. In a daze, I thought I must have repaid the favor now. The next day, when I arrived at the office, I found breakfast and a bouquet of roses on my desk. "Eleanor, do you have a boyfriend?" When we arrived, the flowers and food were already on your desk. "Your boyfriend is so early. He treats you so well." Was this from Reese? What was he planning now? I immediately sent him a message. "Don't send me breakfast, don't send me flowers, I don't care for any of it." Reese replied instantly. This guy liked to take credit for the littlest things. Definitely wasn't him. So who could it be? Was it? I went into the boss's office. "Mr. Thorne, about the breakfast." Mr. Thorne looked up from his computer, giving me a slight glance. "Do you like it?" I was shocked. It was really from my boss? "Why did you do this?" He simply said, "To play the part." So it was just acting. I let out a sigh of relief. I returned to my office, which was buzzing with activity. "Have you heard the gossip? The boss has a girlfriend." "Yes, he kissed a woman at a business gala." I think that woman looked familiar. She looked a bit like Eleanor. Immediately, all eyes fell upon me. "Eleanor, you said you had things to do when I asked you out to dinner yesterday. Could that woman have been you?" Before I could speak, Miss Ophelia Blackwood, with whom I never got along, interjected. "There is no way Mr. Thorne would be interested in Eleanor. That must have been a lady of high birth. Does Eleanor have the poise for that?" Everyone else was slightly embarrassed by what she said, and the topic died down. That evening after work, it suddenly began to rain. I hadn't brought an umbrella and had to wait by the company doors. Ophelia stood beside me, showing off. "My boyfriend's going to drive here to pick me up. You're just going to have to wait until the rain stops." Just then, a luxury car stopped right in front of me. The window rolled down and Mr. Thorne's flawless face appeared before us. "Get in," he said, his tone calm. I got into the car, leaving the dumbstruck Ophelia behind. I stared at the man at the wheel. He was handsome, refined, with deep-set eyes and a high, straight nose. His well-defined hands rested on the steering wheel, exuding a sense of formality. It didn't matter how many times I looked at him, I still thought my boss was so attractive. He was everything I found attractive in a man. Suddenly, he leaned closer, his hand resting on my seat back, practically pulling me into his embrace. My heart skipped a beat. As that handsome face drew near, I closed my eyes subconsciously, even forgetting to breathe. A soft chuckle came from above me. I opened my eyes and realized he was just putting my seatbelt on. I had been so mesmerized by his looks that I had forgotten to put on my seatbelt. How embarrassing. "Did you want me to kiss you?" he asked, a smile in his voice. I had just opened my mouth to deny it, when a kiss landed on my lips before quickly pulling away. "They're satisfied?" he said with a hint of tenderness. My face flushed instantly. This was too much like we were actually in a relationship. With all this handsomeness before me, it was easy to get carried away. I worked to compose myself. Only after I had my heart rate under control did I finally manage to speak. "Mr. Thorne, there's really no need to keep this charade going so far. Everyone at the office knows by now." "Why? Are you bothered?" His voice became low. It's nothing to me. I just thought that Mr. Thorne would be destroying his reputation. I don't mind, he said lightly. For some reason my heart beat a little faster with a sweet sensation. Even if this was all just an act, I allowed myself to get swept away. The next few days we ate together and watched movies. Felt like we were actually dating. Mr. Thorne had even taken me to his house. As soon as we arrived, I naturally headed to the kitchen, but he pulled me back and had me sit on the sofa. I'll go, he said. Mr. Thorne could cook? Before, he was either at a business dinner or eating the food that I had cooked for him. During his blind date, he had demanded a whole lot from the woman. He was the very definition of someone who couldn't lift a finger or even tell the difference between different types of grain. I was a little worried, so I watched him through the kitchen doorway. Mr. Thorne was wearing an apron, cutting and cooking food skillfully. He had made 3 dishes and a soup, all of which were my favorite. He was so thoughtful that I almost suspected that Mr. Thorne had been secretly in love with me and was watching me closely. A few days later, Mr. Thorne told me that he wanted to take me to meet his friends. A burst of joy welled up inside me before I was hit with sadness. This was all an act. A reflection of the moon in the water. I didn't want to ruin this illusion, but I also knew that I was going to get in too deep. I was afraid that by the time he decided to end it, I wouldn't be able to pick myself back up. Mr. Thorne, there's really no need to meet your friends just for an act. He went silent. He must think that I'm right. My heart sank, feeling a dull pain. I felt like I was losing all my strength. My nose began to sting. Then Mr. Thorne suddenly said, "Then let's make this real." And just like that, Mr. Thorne and I were in a real relationship. I was so excited that I couldn't sleep the entire night. But there was also a strange unease within me. This was too dreamy, it felt fake. The next day, Mr. Thorne went on a business trip. I couldn't resist sending him a message. Mr. Thorne was a workaholic, but he answered all my messages. How's the weather? Sunny. How's the business deal? The client is an old man, and he talks a lot. Did that client know that the young, successful CEO with the serious expression on his face was secretly making fun of him? I couldn't help but laugh. That night, I couldn't resist sending another message. He didn't reply right away. I guessed that he must be at some work dinner. At 8 o'clock, he sent me a message. I miss you. That message made my heart jump. Suddenly, I couldn't wait to see him. Where are you? He sent me an address. I looked it up. It wasn't too close, but also wasn't too far. It was about a 2-hour drive away. Would it be all right if I came to see you? He replied quickly. Sure. And then followed it up with another message. Go to sleep early. I'll be back the day after tomorrow. He clearly didn't think I was serious. But this wasn't just a whim. I wanted him and wanted to see him right away. So I did something quite drastic. I went to the garage, got the car that I hadn't used in a while, and drove to the neighboring city. 2 hours later, I arrived at Mr. Thorne's hotel. I went up to the 18th floor. Mr. Thorne said he was staying in room 1802. I headed towards 1802 and was met with a most unexpected scene. At the door, a beautiful woman wearing a black dress was embracing Mr. Thorne. I froze. Lucian, you don't have a girlfriend and I don't have a boyfriend. How about we be together? The woman said, her voice slurred as if she was drunk. Imogen, if you continue like this, I'll call security, Lucian said, pushing the black dress woman away with annoyance. And I've said I have a girlfriend. That's impossible. You couldn't possibly fall for someone else. The woman, upon noticing me, stared at me as if I were a ghost before hurrying away. When Lucian saw me, he was ecstatic. Eleanor, am I dreaming? I raised an eyebrow. Why don't you pinch yourself and see? Lucian actually did pinch himself, wincing in pain. Silly fool, I said, chuckling. The boss I was used to was a composed professional. Lately, I had been seeing more of his foolish side. It was strangely endearing. You're not angry anymore, he asked. Why would I be angry? That was Imogen. Imogen Fairfax, the sister of my friend Alistair. If she wasn't your friend's sister, would you have sent her to the police? As we chatted, the awkwardness from earlier disappeared without a trace. I had come because I missed him and hadn't thought much about the details. It was only when we were alone together that I started feeling uncomfortable. I took a shower first, wearing my usual cartoon pajamas while I watched TV on the sofa. The sound of the water in the shower reached my ears. Couldn't help but let my thoughts wander. The boss always wore formal suits, exuding an air of abstinence. How would he look after a shower? My eyes widened. The bathroom door opened, and a tall figure emerged, still wreathed in steam. He was only wearing a towel around his waist, showcasing his toned physique, slim waist, and chiseled abs. He looked incredibly attractive. I stared, unable to look away. I even swallowed. "Hungry?" he asked, noticing my gaze fixed on his abs. I nodded. "Should I order takeout for you?" The boss actually ordered takeout. He kept showing himself off but didn't let me eat. I had started to question if we were actually lovers or archenemies. Late at night, we lay in the large bed, talking under the covers. "Eleanor, just a little longer," Lucian murmured, his voice hoarse as if he was suppressing something. "Just a little longer." Waiting for what? A few days later, Lucian took me to meet his friends. I was quite nervous, expecting them to be the same sort of elitists as him. However, I found they were very easy to get along with. They were all Lucian's childhood friends. "You hid her away for so long. Finally decided to bring her out to show us," one of them said. "Sweetheart, our Lucian can be a bit of a perfectionist. Just ignore it," another added. After some drinks, they became even more chatty. Who knew that after all this time, you two would still end up together? "Here's a toast to you both," said one of them. Lucian drank my portion of the wine. But that line, "After all this time you two would still end up together," struck me as odd. Weren't we simply moving at a natural pace? Where did "after all this time" come from? Imogen arrived later, sitting quietly next to Alistair, looking very well behaved. This was quite a contrast from her drunken and flamboyant behavior at the hotel. But her gaze was full of hostility when it fell on me. I simply ignored it. During the dinner, I added all of Lucian's friends on my social media. That evening back home, I received a message from Imogen. "Lucian doesn't like you at all. You're just a substitute." I was confused. What did that mean? I had never felt secure in my relationship with Lucian. I was an ordinary person while Lucian was a gifted genius. He was incredibly handsome, a young talent, and incredibly wealthy. I was no match for him. Others found it strange, and so did I. Why did Lucian like me? So, when Imogen said I was a substitute, it did ring true. I wanted to figure things out. Substitute for who? If you say I am a substitute, then show me a picture of the original. Imogen actually sent 2 photos. One was a photo of a girl with Lucian from the back. The girl was leaning into Lucian, and they seemed very close. The second photo was of a girl sitting on a window ledge at a hotel, wearing a white dress with sunlight highlighting her, making her look like an ethereal being. It was obvious the person who took the photo was fond of her. The girl's face looked exactly like mine. But I never took those kinds of photos. When I saw those photos, I felt like I had fallen into an icy lake. That is Lucian's ex-girlfriend, and he loved her very much. If I were you, I'd just give up and stay away from Lucian. You don't want to be humiliated when the original returns, Imogen said. The next day, I went to the company with dark circles under my eyes. I wasn't ready for this to be over. I wanted to ask Lucian to clear things, so I could accept it. As soon as I went to the office, I felt like the colleagues were looking at me strangely. It was a look of pity. How can a sparrow turn into a phoenix? Look at that, she's about to be sent back down, Ophelia said, taunting me. She then shared an article to me. President of Shangfeng Technologies secretly meets with mysterious woman. Mysterious woman believed to be Miss Chloe Zhao, known designer, and recently returned from overseas. I quickly scanned over the key information. I managed to keep a straight face before Ophelia. I then went into the restroom, shut the door, and finally broke down. Tears fell. I could already imagine the story. The Zhao and Thorn families were 2 of the most prestigious families in the city. Lucian and Chloe Zhao were childhood sweethearts. For some reason, perhaps for career reasons, they separated. Lucian was deeply hurt. Then, when he met me and saw how much I resembled his first love, he was immediately intrigued. I was used as a substitute in the absence of the original. But once she returned, I would be cast aside. I ran back home in despair. I sent 2 messages to Lucian. One was my resignation and the other was the breakup. I then turned off my phone. The next day I was awakened by knocking on the door. Truthfully, when I heard the knock, I was hoping it was Lucian. But when I opened the door and saw Reese, that hope quickly vanished. "Hey Eleanor Lightwood, what's with that look? You look like I'm a big disappointment," he complained. "And you think you are any better? Look at you, you look like a mess." "I didn't complain," I said. Reese was not happy. I turned around, not wanting to speak to him anymore. He then reached out and poked me. "Hey, you won't find a 3-legged frog, but are you really struggling to find a man?" I felt even worse. Even my ex-boyfriend knew that I had been dumped. How embarrassing. "You didn't look this upset when you broke up with me," he complained. "Don't be so sad. I will take you out to have some fun." Reese dragged me to a bungee jumping place. I had never been interested in extreme sports. When I fell from the high place, my mind was a blank. I couldn't think of anything at all. I actually felt good. Reese took me out the whole day. And my mood was much better. I was not as sad as before. "Was it fun?" he asked. "If you do it more times, you'll start to love it," he said. He was always so unserious. I turned away from him. "Eleanor, I might be a bit unreliable, but I wouldn't cheat or lie. So would you pick me?" Reese suddenly became serious, his eyes fixed on me. Reese was of mixed heritage, and he was always joking around. But he actually had good looks, and when he looked at you seriously, it was very intense. That's how he had fooled me before. I wouldn't fall for him again, we were not a good match. As I was about to refuse, a cold voice came from behind me. "So you are breaking up with me because of him?" I turned to see Lucian standing behind me. His expression was heavy, full of anger and suppressed fury. He looked as if I was the one having an affair. I had wanted to explain, but after thinking about it, it felt meaningless. He was the one who had lied to me, he was the one who was cheating on me, why bother explaining? I didn't speak. Lucian took that as my agreement and turned and walked away. When I got home and turned on my phone, I found that Lucian had called me dozens of times. I took a deep breath and added Lucian to my blacklist. After speaking to a close colleague, I learned that Lucian would not be at the office tomorrow. I decided to go into the company to do my handover tomorrow. The next day I went to the office. After completing the handover, I left. When I reached the underground car park, I did not see the step and almost tripped. The things I was holding fell to the floor. I bent down to pick them up when I noticed a pair of shoes in front of me. A small item had fallen close to the shoes. As I went to pick it up, the hand belonging to the shoes picked it up. "Thank you." My voice trailed off. The owner of that hand was Lucian. Lucian was still wearing his suit, but his hair was slightly messy, his face was pale, and he looked tired. I took the item from his hand and brushed past him. He reached out and held on to me. "Do you like him that much?" he asked. I nodded randomly, turned around, and walked away. After a while, I couldn't help turning back to look. Lucian was still standing there. His tall figure was filled with a sense of loneliness. I was the one who was dumb, so why did he look so hurt? That was ridiculous. The next time I met Lucian, it was after a business dinner. I had changed companies and worked as a manager's assistant. A client had started to grope me. "Miss Lightwood, this is one of our most important clients. Make sure you treat him well. And if you close the deal, I will give you a raise," my manager said, as if it was no big deal. As his hand moved to my thigh, I poured my beer all over his face. My manager was furious. "Eleanor Lightwood, he is our client. Can't you put up with him for a bit?" "I'm sorry, manager, but he is not my client. And I am resigning." After having fired my manager, I turned and left. I felt defeated as soon as I stepped outside. I was so unlucky. I ordered a car, but due to the rain, it had not arrived. A car stopped in front of me. I looked at the license plate and saw it wasn't the one I had ordered, and so I stepped back. Then a man came out of the car and tried to drag me towards it. It was the client I had splashed with beer. I tried to struggle, but a woman's strength was not comparable to a man's. Just as I was about to be dragged into the car, a figure flashed past me. The man dragging me received a blow. It was Lucian. Lucian beat him up, giving him a black eye before calling the police. I have to say Lucian looked very cool fighting. I still feel my heart skip when I think of it. But he was someone else's man. While waiting for the police to arrive. Why isn't he coming to pick you up? Lucian asked. Huh. I thought for a moment and then realized that Lucian was talking about Reese. Lucian seemed very angry. Why didn't he care about you? Letting you wander around this late. I thought for a moment before replying. Please don't speak about Reese, it has nothing to do with him. We are no longer together. Lucian paused, a strange light flashed in his eyes. He was about to speak when the police arrived. Since finding out that Reese and I weren't back together, I started to bump into Lucian quite a lot. Sometimes it was when I was going to an interview. Sometimes it was when I was eating. And later I had successfully changed jobs. After work I also often bumped into Lucian. If it was once or twice it could be seen as a coincidence. But if it was 5 or 6 times in half a month, you would be stupid not to know that this wasn't normal. That day after work it was raining heavily. My new company was very close to the subway so I didn't drive. As I was waiting for a car outside the company doors, a car stopped in front of me. The car window rolled down, revealing that familiar handsome face. Need a lift? This was the 3rd time. The first 2 times I had simply ignored him. This time I sat in his car, purposefully sitting in the back seat. Lucian, what do you think you're doing? I asked him, slightly annoyed. I am pursuing you. I choked. Was he so shameless as to say that he was pursuing me after cheating on me? Aren't you getting married soon? Why are you pursuing me? Do you want me to be your mistress? What marriage? President of Shangfeng Technologies secretly meets Miss Chloe Zhao. I recited the article from that day, wanting to see him squirm. But Lucian didn't show any embarrassment. He simply laughed. Half an hour later, the car parked in front of my apartment building. Lucian didn't let me leave the car, he moved to the back seat. I looked at him warily. What are you doing? He leaned in, that handsome face only a few inches away from me. I could even see my own reflection in his eyes. Eleanor, listen to me. I am not getting married. I also didn't meet with Chloe Zhao secretly. It was a family gathering, and someone took the photos and posted them online with false information. And Chloe Zhao and I are not possible, wouldn't you know that? I was confused. Wouldn't I know that? Know what? Chloe Zhao likes girls. And she even pursued you once. Lucian's words were like a thunderbolt. Lucian looked at my blank expression. His eyes filled with pain. You've forgotten everything. Let's not speak about Chloe, what about the white moonlight? That day, Imogen sent me a message, then immediately retracted it. Thankfully I had been smart enough to take a screenshot of everything. And I placed the 2 photos in front of him. Who is this? She looks exactly like me. Lucian looked at me with tenderness in his eyes. That's you. I was shocked. The girl in the photos was me. Was it possible that I had been the one with amnesia? Thinking about it, I actually had suffered from amnesia once. 2 years ago I was in a car accident and lost 2 years of my memory. Those 2 years I had been overseas. My friends were all in the country, and my phone had been lost. So, there was no way of knowing what had happened to me during those 2 years. Lucian then told me everything from those 2 years. I had studied overseas and met him working as a bartender. I had fallen in love with him at first sight. Thinking he was poor, I offered to be his sugar mama. Those 2 years I worked and supported Lucian. It was hard, but we were happy. Lucian would cook and wait for me to return home. And in order to save money, we stayed home to watch movies. I was stunned. You're so rich, and you waited for me to earn money to support you? Lucian looked a little helpless. I had a disagreement with my father, and my bank accounts were all frozen. The money I earned at work, I saved them. I wanted to buy a ring. Later, I had saved up enough and bought a ring, and I wanted to propose. But on that day, I waited until late at night, but you didn't return. I had a car accident. I mumbled and memories flooded back to me. I was taking a gift from the shop assistant, and it was a gift for Lucian, a pair of cufflinks. As I was leaving the shop, I was hit by a car. Why didn't you tell me all of this earlier? I complained. If Lucian had told me earlier, Then there wouldn't be all those misunderstandings. I wanted to wait until you remembered, he said. I finally understood. No wonder Lucian had said, just a little longer that day at the hotel. He was waiting for me to recover my memory. Lucian might be a man of logic, but he had his moments of stubbornness and romance. In order to help me recover my memory, Lucian would do the things that we used to do together. However, he would never sleep with me. Every time that I got worked up and wanted to pounce on him, Lucian would push me away firmly. Wait until you remember everything first. I would always touch his abs, trying to remember the past. Perhaps it was the allure that Lucian was giving me, but one day I finally did remember everything. In the brightly lit bar, a young waiter with a handsome face and eyes like the starry sky. I had downed a few shots for courage, then went up to him and stopped him. You look very good looking. You should do something that contributes to society. Why don't you let me be your sugar mama? In the narrow rented room, we had slept together. At the square in a foreign land, we had welcomed the new year together. The memories came back clearly. Lucian came out of the shower, and I looked at him with desire. As he drew closer, I jumped onto him. Lucian, I remember everything. Lucian's epilogue. The girl I love had disappeared. I looked for her all over, but I couldn't find her. My girl disappeared from the world without a trace. Later I returned to the country. I met her in a restaurant. I was overjoyed. But the next moment my heart was cold. A man had his arms around her. They were whispering to each other. I investigated her. I had learned that she had been in a car accident, and her parents had taken her back to the country to rest. She had also lost a portion of her memory. The man she was with was someone that she had met at the hospital. They seemed happy together. I came to the decision to not disturb her. One day, as I was passing by the office, I heard a familiar voice. My name is Eleanor Lightwood, and I would like to apply for the position of a president's assistant. She became my assistant. I suppressed my feelings and only peeked at her from time to time. And I had a secret wish that she would break up with that man called Reese. Perhaps the heavens heard my wish. They had broken up. I suppressed my happiness and said without expression, Miss Lightwood, do you have time after work? Can you tidy up my room for me? Before leaving, I made sure to mess up the covers of the sofa. The inn